Picture this. You get an idea for a song while you're in the shower. Maybe it's some lyrics that you start writing down immediately in your notes app. Maybe it's a melody that sounds so emotive on your stylophone. Either way, you know you've got a hit on your hands. So you flesh the idea out further. You add more sections. You show some friends, maybe even some other musicians. Once the song is ready, you, your fellow musicians, your producer, your engineer, all go into a studio to record and mix this song. And you turn what initially started out as a fleeting thought in the shower with your corn dog into a piece of recorded music. But there's one last step before you can release your baby out into the world. Finally, the song is mastered. What does that mean? You lay it on a rice bed and season it with fresh herbs and lemon. Audio mastering is a process that is often shrouded in mystery, even to folks who work in music. Everyone knows it's important, but very few people truly know what goes into it. So today, let's become masters of knowing what audio mastering is. The concept of a mastering engineer comes from the days of tape recording. The person who would move the recording done on tape to a vinyl record was called the transfer engineer. Back then, their goal was making sure the grooves on a vinyl record didn't move enough to eject the stylus during playback, so it wasn't necessarily a creative job. It was in the late 60s, with the growth of audio engineering as a creative field, when we started to see the title change from transfer engineer to mastering engineer. We also saw mastering engineers credited on recordings, folks like Doug Sachs and his mastering lab, or Bob Ludwig and his work on Led Zeppelin 2. But the doors got blown wide open for mastering with the rise of the CD. The compact disc brought with it several technological advancements, most importantly, the capacity for higher dynamic range in music. The mastering engineer was the one responsible for balancing the desire for loudness with a recording that was still musical. All this has me thinking, being a mastering engineer is probably a lot of fun. Wouldn't it be cool if I talked to a mastering engineer? I guess we'll never know.
My name is Adam Ayan. I am a mastering engineer at Ayan Mastering. We are at Ayan Mastering here in Portland, Maine, on the beautiful peninsula in New England.
You've likely heard Adam's work mastering and remastering albums by Lana Del Rey, Father John Misty, Shakira, Queen, Bruce Springsteen, Journey. He's worked on several Grammy-winning albums, and he's even won a few himself. Surely, if anyone knew what mastering is, it would be him.
I define mastering as the final creative step in the process of making a recording. Also, it's the first step in digital distribution and manufacturing. On the creative side, we're able to affect the final mix, generally speaking, in stereo, with equalization and dynamics processing, other tools if needed, to make every recording sound the best that it can. Once that part is accomplished and the client loves it, approves of it, we then start the distribution and manufacturing by outputting final masters and doing quality control of said masters before they leave our facility and go to our clients.
A likely story. Because it's accurate. But how does someone even get into audio mastering?
I started out as a student at the University of Massachusetts at Lowell in the sound recording program and did an internship at a mastering studio in Cambridge, Massachusetts called MWorks Mastering. Subsequently worked for them for a bit and realized I really wanted to continue in mastering, and very early on in my career ended up at Gateway Mastering Studios here in Portland, Maine.
He was one of two mastering engineers there, the other being Bob Ludwig. You've also likely heard Bob's work before. Led Zeppelin 2, like I mentioned earlier, but also Random Access Memories, Viva La Vida, Sound and Color, In Utero, Kurt Fell Asleep in Front of the Left Speaker. With Bob and Adam together, Gateway became a premier destination for musicians' mastering needs. And when Bob retired in 2023, Adam struck out on his own.
Most of my clients come to me because they like what I do. They know my track record. I have clients I've been working with for 20 years. I have clients I'll work with today that are brand new to me that came to me because they like what I do.
But what separates a mastering engineer from any other kind of engineer in music today? Why does it have to be its own separate position? Well, let's consider that the studio recording world has three main engineering jobs: recording engineer, mixing engineer, and mastering engineer. There's overlap, of course. Many engineers do more than just one thing, but those are the three main categories. Recording engineers are responsible for capturing performances at their highest fidelity. Mixing engineers are responsible for fine-tuning the balance of all the elements in a mix. Both jobs require someone to be immersed in the smallest details, but a mastering engineer has to look at a recording in its totality. That's actually what drew Adam to mastering in the first place.
Mastering is really unique of those three in the sense that we're getting to look at the whole picture. I like to think that I get to work and affect the recorded music from a macro view, from like that 10,000 miles up or 10,000 feet up kind of view. What really spoke to me about mastering, and I'd like to think this goes all the way back to me as a young fan of music, is the ability to hear the recording as a whole and affect it as a whole, as opposed to just working on sort of the nuts and bolts and pieces of it.
Also, consider not just the mental switch, but the emotional switch too. If you've been recording or mixing an album for a bit, there might be aspects that you don't want to touch due to some emotional connection. Another benefit of a mastering engineer is to have someone who doesn't have that emotional attachment to the project and who is more capable of maybe not killing your darlings, but reducing them, so to speak. Your gorgeous string quartet piece might have a rippin' bagpipe solo in the middle, and that's great and valid if it enhances the artist's vision. But a mastering engineer might reduce some part of the overall frequency range so that the bagpipes don't overwhelm the strings. Man, I never get to have any fun.
I can't go in there and turn faders up or down. I can't change, reverb. I can't do certain things. And the things that maybe have been labored over by the recording and mix engineer, preconceived notions that they have of that recording because they've spent so many hours on certain parts of it. I don't know any of that work that's gone into it unless they share that with me. And it's better that I don't know often because I can just turn up the music and say, oh, what needs affecting? What needs to happen to make this sound its best without any of those preconceived notions.
But how about a mastering engineer's place in the broader music ecosystem? How does one work with an artist or other personnel?
I work in a lot of different genres, and say country might have some things about country production that are inherent to it that are different than rock, that are different than Latin, so on and so forth, and things you have to think about and be mindful of. But what I've found over the years with all the relationships I've built and all the artists and record producers I've worked with, that it even gets more granular than that in terms of what they are looking for in particular. So it may be, say, a Latin artist, and there are certain things about Latin music that are inherent to it that you need to be respectful of and creatively mindful of, but also one artist or one producer may differ from another in terms of what their expectation is and what they're trying to achieve creatively. I would say that most of the time I'm chosen to master a record by the record producer. I mean, there's every exception to that. Sometimes it is the artist directly, sometimes it is the mix engineer, recording engineer. But if I had to name one part or one person in the whole realm of any given record that generally speaking chooses me to master the record, it's often the record producer, sometimes the artist. I built this new facility here at Ayan Mastering so that clients could attend whenever they'd like. And I would say so far we've only been open here in this new space for about 6 months. I want to say maybe 5 to 10% of my sessions have been attended at most. And it was a variety of personnel. Sometimes it was the artist, sometimes it was the producer, sometimes it was the engineer. However, no matter how it works out, I do not work in a vacuum. So when I finish doing what I do, sets of reference files go to whomever needs to get them. And there's always a back and forth in terms of feedback. So it's either, version 1 is approved, or hey, can we do a version 2 that's a little this way or that way, or we've recalled mixes, can you change a song, can you change the track order if it's an album, that sort of thing. So all that said, there are artists whom I've done, mastered almost their entire catalog and have never once spoken to the artist or seen them in person. Though I've spoken to their producer and their engineers, quite often. That's kind of been the way mastering has always been. Of course, the internet has, the ability to pass files through the internet has made that even more so. Often the producers I'm working with might be, juggling multiple projects, same with the engineers. The artist might be out on tour. All these things are happening, but we're able to work remotely and talk over, it's a variety of communication means.
All of what Adam has described so far about mastering seems pretty reasonable. There's no hidden mysteries, no dark arts, no pentagrams being used here. Or at least if there are pentagrams, Adam did a good job covering them up. So why do people have a hard time understanding what mastering is?
I think that there's a lot of mystery in what mastering is, if only because it's such a niche part of the business, part of the industry, part of the entire process. So there are very few of us that do it, very few that have done it for their entire career or most of their careers. Our ability to really affect a final mix in so many positive ways sonically tends to come off as some kind of magic or dark arts or whatever you might want to call it. But again, I think it's really mainly because most folks don't see what we're doing, haven't done it themselves, and there's a lot less mystery to what we do. It's like a lot of other things in our industry and many others, in that it's a lot of refined hard work. Clients will come or they'll send files, I'll send them back masters, and they're like, I have no idea how you did what you did, but I love it, and that always makes me really happy. But I do like to take a little bit of the mystery out of it, at least in the sense that, like, I'm not doing any weird magic here. I'm just doing something that I've done for a better part of my adult life, and this is one skill, mastering, that is very different and a very different discipline than what most people are used to doing in the audio field.
I'll add one other piece to what Adam just said as well. To properly hear the work of a mastering engineer, you would need the unmastered recording to compare it to. But as listeners, we rarely, if ever, get access to that unmastered recording of a song or an album. So it's hard for us to properly identify what was done in mastering versus mixing, especially when we don't have years or decades of listening experience. Plus, the adjustments a mastering engineer makes often have less to do with audible sound and more to do with feelable feel.
You know, obviously what we do is creative. It's a creative endeavor, and everybody brings their own creative sensibilities to what they do. Now, my job, all of that said, my job is to make sure I sonically get the recording to the finish line in the way that the artist wants it. You know, I'm there as a service provider, and my job is to make sure I'm seeing the artist's vision through. But of course I have my own sensibilities. So if you give me a mix to master and you give that same mix to another mastering person, you're probably gonna get something that's fairly close but somewhat different. And those differences are gonna be the sensibilities of each mastering engineer. So I do know what I like, and it may differ from what, say, my peers and colleagues at other mastering studios like. And then it's a matter of, well, does the artist like that? And of course, refining my process and what I do to see their sonic vision through.
It sort of reminds me of VFX work in movies, but not like giant aliens or big explosions. I mean like when a bar is CGI. Instances where its use is subtle and not as loud. But speaking of loud, there is one sin that mastering engineers are often charged with committing, something that has impacted music ever since the CD days. Loudness. I'm sure we all remember the loudness war. So many loved ones lost. I've actually never said this publicly, but I lost a couple people during the Battle of Death Magnetic. As a quick refresher, the loudness war describes the phenomenon starting in the 1990s when music was heavily compressed in the mastering stage in order to sound louder overall. This was influenced by the idea that loud thing equal good thing, and so louder thing must equal gooder thing. But how does Adam handle loudness in his work?
Loud often tends to be impressive at first. And as we all know, the more we listen to something that's really loud, it gets grating and fatiguing, and then you want to turn it off. If I can be a little historical, this has been going on forever, since recorded music started. The big difference in this in the late 90s and into the 2000s was the ability to do this now in the digital domain. So what would happen in the analog domain is getting loudness would sort of break, for lack of a better way of saying it, much more quickly than it does with the tools that we now have in the digital domain. In other words, you'd hit distortion, negative diminishing returns much faster in the analog domain than you do in the digital domain. And these tools have continued to be refined to let you go further than we ever could in terms of loudness in the digital domain. My thinking on loudness has always been that, number one, I'm making records for my clients. And there's been this notion for many, many years that everybody wants their record to be really loud. Do I love that? Not absolutely, but what I've thought of in that realm as my challenge as a mastering engineer, my entire mastering career, almost 30 years, has been, well, how do I achieve loudness with the least amount of diminishing returns and the most musicality possible? How do I get this level to a place but maintain some dynamic range, maintain low ends, not get into distortion. So it's impressive in terms of loudness, but the musicality is retained. And I'd like to think I've worked really hard to do that. So occasionally a client will come back and say, hey, that's perfect. That's exactly where I want it to be. Awesome. Occasionally they'll come back and say, hey, I think we could even go more dynamic if you want, even better. And then occasionally they'll say, I want it louder. I just want it louder. Okay, we'll do that. I'll consult with them, as to what those diminishing returns are going to be, and they can see whether or not they bothered them. And thankfully, it doesn't come up very often for me, hardly ever actually. The great news is, and I hope more folks catch on to this, is why I want to kind of say this now, is in a streaming world, we can get away from the loudness wars even more than ever. They still exist. There's still the notion of wanting to make sure your record is as loud as the next artist's. And I understand that, but there's less need to do that. And I have actually seen a bit of a pullback in terms of loudness over the past several years, where I can make things not as loud as I had to 5 to 10 years ago, and clients are still really satisfied. And I do think that the streaming world, being the dominant means of how we consume music now, how we listen to music, has made that so and will continue to do so.
Thank goodness this existential threat to music has been resolved. Now we can focus on the next one. Now, I have talked about AI in music before, but it's only really been on the music generation side. I haven't touched on it when it comes to music production or recording. But it's been a thing for a while now. It seems like most companies in this space today have injected at least a little bit of AI into their software or plugins. And on the most extreme side of things, you have companies saying that their AI-powered plugins can instantly mix or master your song.
I'm not naive enough to believe that this isn't going to be revolutionary. It certainly is in a lot of ways. On the audio side of things, I've yet to see anything on the AI front that wows me or excites me or I feel like informs me, at least in a mastering space, to be better creatively. I'll be as bold to say that I don't feel that AI will ever take away those sensibilities that we talked about that come with human beings and their creative aspects. What I'd love to see, and I feel as though a lot of industries are feeling this way, is more focus with AI on how do you make good tools that help inform all of those things. I've yet to see any in the mastering space. I'd love to see them as they, I will certainly keep my ear to the ground, so to speak. But right now I'm a bit of an AI skeptic, and I haven't seen anything that I feel like is blown up my world in a positive way.
But even though AI mastering isn't terribly exciting just yet, the rise of AI in music has caused quite a commotion. In a world where these tools will likely continue to exist, it raises two questions for engineers, musicians, and listeners alike. Why does each step in the recording process matter today, and what do we gain when humans are the ones doing them?
I think mastering matters today in that we're sort of a sonic benchmark. Recorded music, the broad part of it, how do we make recorded music sound its best at the end stage, that last creative step, which also makes it sound really great across multiple formats, whether they be distribution formats and consumer playback formats, consumer playback devices, listening systems, listening environments. All of these things go hand in hand with what we do to make recorded sound its best. I have found all of the ways that the recording industry has changed in most of the time that I've been in it. There's a huge, huge change in how we record music, starting with the DAW, how it's consumed and distributed, i.e. the internet, what has changed with recording studios and how and where professionals do their work, recording, mix, and mastering engineers. And what I've found from a mastering engineer's perspective is that I'm relied on more than ever to make sure everything sounds the best it can be. So I've been around and worked on lots of records where the recording engineer and the mix engineer are working in an environment that was maybe different than they were working in 20 years ago. And they may consult with me at the very beginning of their process. Can you just make sure, hey, I'm trying new speakers, or I'm in a new mix room, or something about the process has changed. Can you make sure it sounds great? In a room like this one that we're sitting in that I built here at A&M Mastering is made for neutrality. And the idea is that this is a sonic benchmark in so many ways. I can bring that music up and I can say, oh, maybe you're not hearing enough low end because you've exaggerated it a little more than it needs to be. Or maybe your speakers are a little dull because these mixes are coming up brighter than I'm used to hearing from you, or brighter than they should be. Or oftentimes, because really great recording and mix engineers adapt really well and really quickly, I can just give them the blessing of like, man, it sounds awesome, and then affect it as best as possible, again, to make make it sound the best it can be.
But I want to hear from you now. What are your thoughts on audio mastering in this day and age? Have you ever tried mastering your own music? Do you want to do what Adam does? Let me know down in the comments. There's clearly a lot that goes into mastering. As Adam brought up during our talk, the low end is a key range for audio. Whether you're mixing or just listening, you deserve gear that will give you clear yet powerful bass. Which brings me to this video's sponsor, Mackie. Hey Macklemore, can we go thrift shopping? Deep at the bottom of the ocean, born from thousands of years of sedimentation, frequencies below 250 hertz were born. In a world where most people's Spotify EQ curve looks like The Rock, properly hearing low frequencies matters more than ever. And that's where Mackie's CR8S BT subwoofer comes in. A polypropylene coated woofer within an all-wood seal enclosure gives you low end that you can hear and feel. You can also fine-tune the sound using the included CRDV desktop remote. Connect the CR8S BT to your home setup with traditional cables or Bluetooth. I use mine with my CR 3.5 speakers, but it'll work with any pair of similar monitors and adds Bluetooth to them. And with its low-profile 8-inch build, you can place it wherever you wish in your space. Let me show you what this thing can do. So I've got my CR8S right here. I've got 8 more in my living room, all stacked on top of each other. All of them are maxed out, volumes all the way up. I've got a bass boosted playlist pulled up here on YouTube. And again, volumes all the way at the max. Let's hear how it sounds. Thanks to Mackie for sponsoring this video. I need to lay low for a bit.